The Sega Genesis Mini, both of them, are some of the best mini consoles on the market. Every game included plays incredibly accurate to how they were originally portrayed, if not better thanks to the masters at M2, and both are competently made with comfortable controllers and a detailed look. That being said, this is the 200 millionth time we've gotten some kind of Genesis compilation, and I'm sick of it! How many times can you sell me Streets of Rage 2 before I stop buying it? As many as you want, I'll never stop buying this game. I and many other Sega lovers are frustrated with this favoritism because there are so many other games that haven't gotten another chance in the spotlight simply because they came out on the company's other systems. It's about time they got some love, particularly a mini console of some kind. And I can't think of one more deserving of just that than...
Introducing Sega Saturn. Aww, hit it.
Some may argue the Dreamcast due to it being a better console in general, which is debatable, but that system has had more of its library featured on other platforms than the one they originated on, with the Saturn not being able to make that same claim. Therefore, I believe it should get the mini console treatment first, and I've compiled a list of games I also believe should make the cut. After all, we can't just throw every Saturn game on this thing, especially if we're going into this under the assumption that M2 will be tasked with porting these titles. They are porting these titles, right? The PlayStation Mini came with 20 games, and considering that was the same generation as the Saturn, let's go with that. 20 Saturn games. Plus 2. Come on, Sega usually throws in a couple of bonus games on top of the standard list, so let's imagine that they'll throw us a bone here too, okay? Okay. Regardless of these limitations or that the Saturn supposedly has no games, this list was very hard to trim down. However, it wasn't impossible, so we're gonna go over that list right the heck now. We're starting with the shoo-ins. After all, is it really the Sega Saturn without Nights? Nights into Dreams is an awesome score attack game whose entire existence might as well revolve around the system. That being said, it is one of the few games for it that's been much more accessible due to a handful of re-releases, so while it's not the most exciting title to include by a fair margin, it obviously deserves to be here. Although a way to make it a little more exciting is by including Christmas Nights as an additional bonus on top of the standard list and 2 extra games, since the bonus mode where you can play as Sonic wasn't included in future re-releases. Suddenly, the concept of a Saturn Mini is already sounding like a great time. Speaking of Sonic, you're damn right his games are getting in. Normally that'd be reason to celebrate, but remember that the only 2 Saturn games the Hedgehog got were Sonic R and 3D Blast. Yeah. For what it's worth, I've always thought of Sonic R as a guilty pleasure, and we've never seen the Saturn's take on 3D Blast get a re-release. It not only has one of my favorite soundtracks up there with, ironically, Sonic R, but also has one of the best special stages. Not exactly a high bar, I can't think of anyone who plays Sonic 3 for Blue Spheres, but I would play 3D Blast for special stages like these. They're so good, I almost forget how bad the normal game is, so that alone is reason to at least be accepting of this game coming with the console. As for Sonic R, get over it, the game's good. Right, guys? On the topic of racing games, we've got to include Daytona USA, right? Licensing? What's that? The thing you need to drive? For real, I know it's worth considering the fact that Sega won't be willing to renew licenses for games that require such, but since this is just a speculatory video, let's just gloss over that little detail. If the only thing keeping Sega from including games on this mini console was the language barrier, then Daytona USA would absolutely make the cut for being one of the most iconic racers not just on the system, but arguably Sega's entire catalog. I don't think I can say quite the same for Sega Rally, but it's nonetheless beloved by those who have experienced it. Let's have these 2 along with Sonic R to fill our racing quota. I know Sonic R is making you both look bad, but just deal with it for me, alright? You guys ruled the arcades. Let Sonic take hold of people's households. Actually, on that note, I don't know about you, but when I think of arcades, my mind immediately goes to beat 'em ups. Luckily for us, the Saturn is one of my personal favorites, Guardian Heroes. This, like all of the previous games technically speaking, has seen a re-release, one for the Xbox Live Arcade to be specific, but even in its original, most simplest incarnation, it's a hell of a great time. Fast, crunchy combat, branching routes aplenty, a ridiculous story that I'm definitely paying attention to, and multiplayer co-op all in one. Combine this with an anime aesthetic and one of the best soundtracks on the system, which is saying a lot, Guardian Heroes deserves a bigger audience, and I'm hoping that this opportunity will be realized and exploited. Although, while I think of beat 'em ups when my mind wanders to the arcade, I'm sure that more of you think of fighting games. What fighting game series is more closely associated with the Saturn than Virtua Fighter? Regardless of its sequel getting a decent amount of re-releases, the original has seen far fewer, which is probably for a good reason. This first game isn't really, well, good, but it is an important part of Sega's history that deserves to be preserved. Throw it on the mini console, and if you're gonna do that, you might as well include the sequel too. This one has seen a decent amount of re-releases, but it remains a popular game and should be here regardless. Besides, those re-releases are all either based on the arcade or the Genesis versions, and while the former is good, why the hell do we keep getting the latter? That literally makes no sense to me, but what do I know? I'm not in the industry. It's high time the Saturn version got some love. You can keep your Genesis downgrade. No, but seriously, who's asking for this? I don't get it. Anyway, for our final shoe-in, we have Panzer Dragoon 2, or Zwei as the game puts it. The original Panzer Dragoon has gotten a handful of re-releases, including a full-blown remake, but the same can be said for the sequel. A real shame, because I tend to go back and forth on whether I prefer this or the original due to this one looking better and arguably having superior gameplay. Some may find it weird to include the sequel and not the original for something like this, but let's not forget that Sega has done something along these lines a few times with their other IPs. Just with the Genesis Mini, Sega decided to give us Streets of Rage 2 instead of 1, and Phantasy Star 4 instead of 2, the first of the series on the Genesis. This game can join that party, and I imagine it will. I am considering this the last of the shoo-ins after all. The rest of this list will consist of games that don't have as great a chance of getting included as the aforementioned, but God, I hope they are. God, I hope they are. Panzer Dragoon Saga is one of Sega's most praised RPGs, up there with the likes of Skies of Arcadia. And just like that game, it's inaccessible as hell, not available on modern platforms, and expensive as— oh my God, why? You've probably heard how unreasonably expensive this game is, so if there was ever a time to re-release it, that would be now. Unfortunately, the game's source code was lost, which is probably why we haven't gotten anything for it as of the time I'm writing this, but at the very least, I know for a fact that it's possible to emulate completely, meaning there are methods to make this game playable for a new audience. Time-consuming methods, but methods nevertheless, and the effort will be worth it on all fronts. Just putting this game on the Saturn Mini alone will be enough to get it to sell like hotcakes, and rightfully so. This game is a masterpiece. I need more people to talk about it with. Ball's in your court, Sega. Make it happen? While on the subject of Saturn RPGs, there are quite a few to choose from, and some I wish I could include, but more than anything, I'm almost certain we'll get Shining Force 3. The bad news is that this game was split into 3 scenarios, with only the first one receiving an English translation. So odds are that if this were to be included, it'd just be the first, and as someone who hasn't played this quite yet, I'm not sure how much we'll be missing out on by omitting the other 2. Either way, hey, something's better than nothing, right? The other of Sega's mini consoles have had nearly every other Shining game to this point, so it makes sense for this next one to continue that trend. Of course, we will be skipping over 2 other Shining games released for the Saturn prior to this one in order to include this one, so yeah, you know what? Why not just make it one we'll be skipping? Shining the Holy Ark should be included as well. It harkens back to the very first Shining game being a first-person dungeon crawler and would add more variety to this little batch of RPGs to be included on the mini console. And for our last RPG, if you want to classify it as one, we have Legend of Oasis. Beyond Oasis is one of the more popular Genesis games, as well as a personal favorite of mine, with its sequel being on the Saturn and never getting a re-release. And anyone can hop right in, not just fans of the original, since despite it coming out after the Genesis original, the story itself is a prequel. This one can make the cut. Let's talk shmups. The Sega Saturn's home to a lot of them, and a lot of great ones at that. But if we had to trim it down to the absolute must-haves, there shouldn't be anyone against Radiant Silvergun being one of them. While researching for this video, it didn't matter where I went, everyone claimed this to be an essential for shmup lovers. It's a borderline guarantee. What more is there to be said? Well, how about the fact that it'll also be including Thunder Force 5? Both 3 and 4 have seen quite a few re-releases as a matter of fact, with Thunder Force 3 being included on the first Genesis Mini, and both being included on the Sega Ages Switch lineup. The 5th is another instance of an entry in a beloved series seeing little to no re-releases as a result of debuting on the Saturn, so now would be the time to change that. Both of these should more than satisfy shmup fans looking to get this console, and if not, I mean, you could shoot things in Mega Man 8, I guess. Sega and Capcom, as far as I can tell, have a healthy relationship, so I'd like to see their iconic Blue Boy be included in some way, and I think this would be the best way of going about that. While Mega Man X4 also received the Saturn edition, and out of the 2 games, I much prefer that to this, Mega Man 8 has a larger, more significant list of differences with its PlayStation brother. This being the Mega Man game of the mini console would simply be the smarter choice, as it allowed plenty of players to finally battle those optional bosses among other things. The PlayStation version is always the one that gets included in compilations. Why not shake it up? And when you're done playing it, you can partake in some matches with Capcom's other game I'd like to include, Street Fighter Alpha 2. It's the most popular of the 3 and ran beautifully on the Saturn, with this mini console aiming to deliver the same. The system was clearly, as you no doubt have heard, a 2D powerhouse, which even the more slower paced games showcased, like Astral, that of which I'd like to be included. It's got gorgeous hand-drawn sprite work and is a Sega IP that hasn't seen the light of day since its debut. Think Rise Star for the Genesis. It's basically like that. Not in terms of gameplay, no, just the circumstances and the fact that it has a bit of a cult following. Would love this little guy to at least be acknowledged again. Who knows? His fanbase might just expand further than any of us could have anticipated. Perhaps to the level of something like Shinobi. Huh? Good transition? No? Okay. Shinobi Legions is, like many games included on this list, another entry in a popular series that hasn't gotten a re-release because this is the Saturn. The sprites may take a bit to get used to, but so long as the Shinobi gameplay is as crunchy and responsive as previous entries, I'm sure they'll be easy to look past. And really, I don't know, I don't even think they're that bad. They're charming and a remnant of their time. I always found that kind of thing endearing. But anyway, for those who've been keeping track, that was our 19th game, meaning we're already down to the last of the main list. And golly gee, I wonder what it could be. Maybe not the most shocking pick, but easily the most deserving. While these weren't laid out in any particular order outside of which would flow the best in terms of the script, I won't lie, I want this more than any of the others. And no, it's not because it's my favorite Saturn game or anything. I can't even call it that because I haven't fully played it. While I may have figured out Saturn emulation, this game pushed the console to its limit to the point where my computer can't handle the game without running like this. Man, it's almost like console emulation isn't the end-all be-all solution to game preservation and that companies need to step in before their titles really get lost to time, but yeah, that's about right. For what I did play though, I loved it. As another one of Sonic Team's more experimental titles diverging from the series they're named after, Burning Rangers is a game where you play as an anime firefighter putting out flames, saving citizens, and getting rewarded with a criminally underutilized soundtrack. And I know for a fact that every single one of you who played All-Stars Racing Transformed were bopping your heads to the song that played on the racetrack. This game has that in spades, but better. It's great. The game was fun from what I played, but I want more and for it to run smoothly. If on the off chance that the Saturn Mini does happen and this game isn't included, I might actually cry, and you wouldn't want that. Would you, Sega? Would you? Well, I guess they could soften the blow with the 2 bonus games, if not by much. With one of them potentially being Fighters Mega Mix, aka the game where you can play as a Daytona car. It's wacky, silly, and has never been re-released. We know the meme, now let us know the game. The other, and the true final game of this list, would have to be Deep Fear. This is a game that plays like a lost Resident Evil, only ever released for the Saturn. And while it has an English translation, it never came out in America, just Europe. This would be a great surprise and the closest to a new game without having the fully translated Japanese title or something. The epitome of a bonus. One that, as far as this video goes anyway, completes our list. Let me know if you liked it, and if you don't, leave a comment and tell me your list. And feel free to challenge yourself like I did by coming up with a semi-realistic lineup, because trust me, this isn't my absolute wish list in the slightest. If I could have anything I wanted, the list would mostly be the same. But on top of that, Madou Monogatari fully translated, all 3 parts of Shining Force 3 in English, Sonic Extreme's Prototype, the original Panzer Dragoon, Die Hard Arcade, Lunar Silver Star Story complete, Sakura Wars 1 and 2 fully translated, and finally, Sonic Jam. Not for the classic games, but for Sonic World. Now the lineup is perfect, and if you disagree, well, you're just wrong. Bye.